There we are. So, hi and welcome to the OYS podcast. We're talking all things leadership today. Today, really excited on this one. It's our first ever podcast. We've got someone who was in the Royal Australian Air Force. He was the chief instructor for the Air Force Officers Training School. He's trained over 2,000 junior officers. He's won the prestigious Air Force Association Leadership Sword. He got to the rank as squadron leader. And after leaving the Royal Air Force, worked with some of Australia's biggest organisations on their leadership development and getting them some great success. He's also the CEO of the Institute of Management and Leadership Development. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Jack, thank you very much for having me. I need to have you do my intros wherever I go. That's fantastic. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolutely amazing career off the back of it. But initially, Michael, how are you? How's your week started off?
It started off really well, actually. As you might know, Melbourne's been in lockdown for months, but we've now had a couple of weeks out, and after being hesitant to crawl out of the cave and go see the sunlight, have gotten very used to having a bit more time back. So, yeah, it's been a good start to the week, Jack.
It was a long lockdown for you guys, wasn't it, in Melbourne? It's you had a bit of the taste of what we had over here, and it's never fun when you get out into the big bad scary post-COVID world. But you just take it as it comes. Take it as it comes. But yeah, how's your week kicked off? Has it been a good week so far for you?
So far, yes. A couple of times a month I get to work with a brand new client, and this morning it was starting with a brand new coaching client, and it's a bit like the first day of school or your first day at work, because there's just that excitement and nervousness and excitement. So yeah, working with a brand new senior manager wanting to develop their leadership skills. So that's a great start to the week for me.
That's fantastic. That's really good. Really good. It's but we've just had some snow over here in the UK. I know it's not very accustomed in Australia, but it's been a very cold week, -1 or 2 this week. So we'll see how the weekend goes.
I had heard that father-in-law in the UK had told me that. I'm a little bit happier here, Jack. So
no need to rub it in, Michael. No need to rub it in. Hopefully I get back next year and get some of the sun, obviously February time, hopefully. And
absolutely.
Yeah, it's not jealous at all that you've got a great summer approaching, but we'll keep quiet. Yeah, we keep that on the down low. Michael, obviously you've got a really interesting career. Something that I'm obviously accustomed with is a background in the military. Obviously grandfathers were both in it, and you were in there for nearly a decade. That was right?
Yeah, just over 13 years. Yeah, 14 years roundabout.
Well, yeah, when I'd done a bit of research, you were in the Air Force before I probably even thought of. So that that was an interesting find, to be honest with you.
Let's keep quiet about those numbers then, shall we?
Michael, you don't look a day over 30. Don't you worry. But obviously during that time, you did actually come to Scotland, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I was very lucky to end up on an exchange with the RAF called Exercise Long Look. So I got to spend 4 months working with the guys at Lucas in Scotland.
All right. Yeah.
And an amazing trip. At that time, serving in the Air Force, obviously, and the Australian military hadn't done many operations at that time. So working with the RAF in 1998, getting to see a squadron that was very operational, and whether it was going to Falklands or going to Cyprus or going to wherever else, was fantastic. And also just seeing the way that leadership and culture and tradition was brought together. It was wonderful to be part of.
Yeah, it's Lookers, I'll tell you something. I was in the Royal Air Force Cadets. As much as I would have liked to go into that line of field. That didn't happen. I made the stupid decision of leaving school at 16 and becoming a travel agent and starting my sales career there.
Yeah. There's
no comparison, is there really? But I got the opportunity to fly a plane, and I say fly a plane. There was obviously someone there in the, I think it was a tutor, I think.
Yes.
So spent a lot of time up in Lookers. Really, really good experience. And yeah, I remember there's always that hesitation going on to bases where you're looking about, head up, obviously waiting for that officer to turn around the corner. And that was always
well, I think I had the extra part that being in Australian uniform in the UK during summer, I stood out. So, which when first getting there, I wasn't very comfortable with, but after a couple of months, I'll be honest, I quite like the attention. And given that at some point my wife will listen to this podcast, it would be remiss of me not to mention that the summer ball at Lucas that year, I actually met my wife for the first time. So
did you?
It was yeah, absolutely. So my wife had come up from Manchester meeting friends, and we met for the first time at that ball. So, it was a momentous trip for many reasons.
So Scotland's not just a lavish and glorious place, but it's a bit of a cupid land as well.
Absolutely. If it's good enough for Prince William to meet his future wife, in Scotland, I can too. So. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Now, obviously, during your time in the Air Force, you won, which correct me if I'm wrong, but looking at it when done a bit of research, obviously, you won the Air Force Association Leadership Sword. What is that for obviously if you're not in the military mind?
It was a recognition, I guess, of working with multiple groups in trying environments, and in part a recognition of the team that I got to work with that was going through quite a difficult transition time at that point. And just a bit of background, the Air Force at that time was going through a massive restructure and cost cutting, and I was working with a group with a bunch of other officers and a big team of about 60, all military. And within a period of 12 to 18 months, there was a large transition. So at the end, I was about the last officer there, and a transition from military to civilian and rationalisation of things. So just a great deal of change and cost cutting, and having to deal with differing expectations, I guess, was probably what that award was recognising. It was, I can say, living it at the time, there was a little bit of drowning, not waving,
right,
in the volume of work and what needed to be done and the transition. But it was wonderful to have a great team and some good people around me that, or the core crew that got to stick to the end for that. So, yeah.
And what, obviously, on the back of that, then, obviously, the Air Force to civilian life is very different. My brother's actually just joined the army. He's got his passing out parade next week, and it's amazing the transition on that. He can make a bed now. You know what I mean? It's a completely different person. But obviously, there must have been a real sort of obviously camaraderie and all that comes with it, I think, naturally. But what would you say, out of your 13, 14 years, what would you say is there one sort of memorable moment? I know that's probably hard in 13, 14 years to pin down, but is there one memory that sort of stands out, one that was fantastic?
There's probably, as you said, there's many. The one that stands out is probably more a feeling that was different when I left and worked in a corporate organization, and I only noticed when it was missing. And that was the working with both Army, Navy, and Air Force, which I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time working with all three services. Was, even though you might disagree, and even though you might at times dislike someone that you were working with, there was always a solid sense of trust. That even though you might not like the person or work with them or subscribe to some of their behaviours, when push came to shove, they would have you back.
Right.
And you could be arm in arm doing a task. And I'm not talking, going to war or being in operations, because I didn't experience that before before I'd left the Air Force and got out. But just the sense of trust and knowing that if you'd made a decision and went a particular way, that others would also back and go with that. And it probably stood out, occasionally on a parade ground, but here in Australia, a very important day in our calendar is Anzac Day, probably on a similar caliber to Remembrance Day in the UK. We don't have many big national days of pride. Australia Day is a day to have a barbecue. It doesn't have many memories. Anzac Day is something that's become very respectful of service and sacrifice. And I was fortunate enough in my last role at Officer Training School to carry the Queen's colour on an Anzac Day parade in Melbourne, which it hadn't been carried on that parade in Melbourne for about 40 years. And we were told that it couldn't be done because you needed to carry certain weapons or armament, and had the opportunity to work with people that went, no, we'll make this happen. And for the officer cadets that were working with us at the time, it was a really special moment because we decided it would happen. And all of a sudden, there is now 200 officers, officer cadet staff marching in groups together for a purpose and remembering. And that stood out, that it was really powerful, and you felt part of something bigger than yourself. And that others, when setting it up, would follow. And it's that feeling's been hard to replicate. And
because like you say, corporate culture is completely different to the military. And I sort of like, being in the cadets, and I know it's by far not anywhere near what the Air Force is, or Army, or Navy, but you do have that sort of, let's just crack on, get this done. And you know what I mean? There is that trust element to it. And I guess no pressure for you either, 40 years of not doing something, and then, and rolling it and getting out there. It must have been an absolute fantastic day. I've been to a couple of Anzac parades, and it's the one day of the year I miss being in the military, which I know sounds strange for a day of sacrifice, but it's that day when you could really not just feel proud, but felt, as I said, part of something bigger. And it was a great feeling to be part of. And as I said, there's not many days that I harken back to my time wearing uniform. I quite enjoy not wearing it, to be honest. But that day, is something different. That's Anzac Day. If you've never been to one, and you do get the opportunity to go to Australia, try and fit that around your calendar, because it's it's similar, like you say, to Remembrance Parade. When I went to a couple, I felt they were a little bit different because you're up at the crack of dawn, to go to it. I think 5 a.m. or the time that you're up, and it's a very, very different day. And a lot of people think Australians are, not one to generalise, but very late in, crack a beer, have a barbie, but on that day, it is a very different atmosphere, I think, for a lot of Australians. And
absolutely,
really,
this country doesn't have much. Well, it doesn't have much history. Its traditions are quite short. I remember being in the UK working with the armed services there, and there were traditions and battle flags and ensigns and colours that existed for hundreds of years, and traditions that had dated back, centuries. We don't have that. And Anzac Day is all of those traditions and memories and responsibility and service all rolled into the one day.
100%. It's really good, and that must be a powerful memory, like you said. So one for you to hold on to forever.
Absolutely. It's funny, I have that memory, and then when I left the Air Force, I worked for a large insurance business here in Australia that I won't name, and working with someone expecting the same level of trust and behaviour, and I was almost working with politicians, I should have been wearing a great big armor vest across my back, because I got I got knifed in the back and was completely unprepared. My military skill set had taught me how to lead looking forward, not necessarily looking behind you at the same time.
Thinking who's next, you know what I mean? But, yeah, I think, I think we've all, in everyone's career, I think we've all been in that situation, haven't we? Looking, I hate to say it, but over your shoulder, because, the moment you mess up a situation, there's always someone behind you that's willing to jump in and save the day.
Absolutely.
Maybe not necessarily the greatest thing, but I guess that's life in the corporate world, isn't it? But obviously, moving on from obviously your military, moving into civilian life, like I said, you've worked with, when we've had previous conversations, you've worked with some really, really big organisations, both like private and government in Australia. So, and I've worked with a few whilst I've been working and living in Australia, and I would say there's a big characteristic difference between maybe how, how Australian businesses and government function and how the UK function. From your experience, now this might not be the right words, Michael, so apologise in advance, but what would you say, once you've been coaching, developing, consulting for these businesses, what would you say has been sort of the best leadership that you've seen? And then what has been the worst leadership you've seen? And worst maybe probably isn't the right word, to be honest with you, Michael. It's quite it's a bit of that's a ropey topic, but maybe more of an area where that person just needed a real deep dive on this is how you should lead, and maybe that on that situation they didn't show their best self.
Yeah. So I'll leave government alone. So I won't talk from a worst or best from a government perspective. That'll skew the discussion. If I think best, let's start with best. The best leadership example I've seen where the leader there has got this wonderful balance between owning and being responsible. So this is my workplace, my business, even if they don't own it, so small business owners, they'll own it, but where a manager is, this is mine, I want to make it better. And will put their hand up if things go well and share it around.
Yeah.
And put their hand up if things go wrong and take the ownership and responsibility. But balancing that with a desire to learn and get better.
Yeah.
And for me, that's almost one of the key differences between the good and the bad. Having a leader that, even though their team or their business has been going well or doing okay to well, wants to challenge themselves first and then challenge the team to do that next bit. They've got that desire to be, we might be good, without the cliche, we can be good, how can we be great? If we're great, how can we get greater? And that desire to improve themselves and then to improve their team, even if they might fall down on or make a mistake or what perhaps could be embarrassing, they seem to turn it around to we're learning and growing. And they're the businesses that when they've got that kind of leadership, you can feel it. You can feel it in the team. It brings that level of trust and cohesiveness. And I think in Australia, it also brings that level of being humble or having humility. A leader that doesn't have humility or demonstrates being humble in a way in Australia will get knocked down fairly quickly. This idea of the tall poppy syndrome, it's alive and well in this country, but it knocks down people that almost get too big for their boots or can't relate to the people that they work with or be humble or, for lack of a better term, to take the piss out of themselves. That's seen as a really positive trait in leaders. And I know in other countries it can be very different. But
I think, the UK and Australia, that's one thing I think I would say we've got in common. Maybe not in all workplaces, I should add that. But I think, what you're saying, I would sort of resonate with. I've managed, I've led teams, and I think, in my early sort of days of managing. You want to come in, do everything, and you're hoping that if you put something out, that it's going to hit the mark straight away and everyone's going to buy into it. Obviously, I'm in sales, so one of the jobs I had was a comm structure, for commission, and in my head it's the best thing ever, like, because I can set myself in their shoes, but then you need to be able to take on maybe constructive feedback. And I've definitely been in situations with leaders where you give them constructive feedback and it's a brick wall. Now this is happening, this is how it's going to happen, and there's no need for you to entertain this conversation. And I think straight away that gets people's backs up, and you just need to, I think if you're open, honest, transparent with your people, I think you always get the best results. Again, like we said, sort of on that accountability as well. If you can't put your hand up when things have went wrong, you're never going to get any buy-in at all, because when you do one-to-ones or coaching with them, you're sort of saying, right, this is an area for your improvement, and you're calling them out on it, but you have to call yourself out on it from a leader's point of view when it's maybe just not hit the mark. And I've definitely been there myself, like 100%. And you just sort of need to sort of pick yourself up and keep going on. And it is just, I think, being open, transparent with people. Because
exactly. And just to be able to be self-assured enough to acknowledge what is working, but then to look equally at what isn't working, even if it's their own leadership, and just to be able to take that on board and say, hey, this is me, or this is where I'm at. If there's an apology needed, great, but here's where I want to go and how I want to get better. I find most teams or people will forgive a lot if the person there is humble enough to admit when they've made a mistake or done something wrong, but they want to make good on what they've done. They want to improve it. Yeah.
And on that then, we've discussed a couple of bits there, and leadership isn't summed up into one word. There's many components to it to be a good leader. If it was one, it would be a really quite an easy development area, but that's not the case.
Good question, I think.
When it comes to leadership, is there a trait that you've seen that really does like stand out, that you go, right, yeah, they're a fantastic leader when you're maybe, like say, when you're consulting or coaching senior leaders?
I had an inkling this was going to be a question, and I was debating it, and I came up with various different versions. I would have said many years ago it probably would have been vision, or it would have been purpose, or example, or responsibility. And nothing wrong with any of those. They're all great traits of leaders. But more recently, I think that the trait that stands out for me in a really good, authentic leader is, of all things, curiosity.
Yeah.
Someone who is, I know that's a weird one to say as a leader, but with someone who's curious, they'll never stand in the place of, I know everything and I've got it all worked out. And so the leader that's curious about where they can develop or where they can build, what they can learn. So they'll approach something from that curious, I want to learn more, as opposed to, I've got it all worked out and the problem's over there. Which has been, I would say that's almost where the worst leaders I've seen is, that the problem's not me, the problem's my team.
Everyone else apart from you.
Absolutely. And invariably, when you have a good look at the team, the problem isn't the team, the problem's the leader that won't look. I think also with curiosity comes no bias and no predetermined judgment. So they're the good leaders that when it comes to difficult conversations or awkward things, don't come in straight away and lash out or prejudge people in the hard things. They'll be a bit more curious and want to know why. They're the types of people, when it comes to values and purpose, will ask questions. I find even non-empathetic people, like I know there's a big movement, I guess, to have an empathetic leader or an authentic leader. Whereas I think if you've got a curious leader, they can almost cover those things. Empathy is, seeking to understand somebody else's position, place, walk in their shoes. Well, if a curious person asks the right questions, they come across that way very much. So I think curious to know why and curious to know how, for me, certainly most recently been the traits of the really good leaders that I've worked with.
Yeah. And I think, sort of reverting back to, if people are listening, they've maybe been in this situation, like what you said, where people are coming into maybe difficult conversations or conversations that, you maybe don't want to have with your manager or your supervisor. And, I think we've all been in that situation where it's like, what's happening before this meeting even starts, before it's even kicked off. And I think, a lot of that is, I know I've worked in organizations, but it's very like process driven, where if they do, let's just say a sickness example, it's maybe not the best one, but if they're off for this amount of days, this is what happens. They need to be written up and that's it. And for me, I find that really difficult because if I'm managing someone, I want to have a conversation and say, are you all right? Tell me what happened. Is everything all good at home? What's the situation like? X, Y, and Z, because I think, especially now with COVID, I do find some days tough working from home. It can be challenging because you've not got anyone to bounce off. You're sort of isolated in your own little world. And
absolutely,
everything's over Teams and, or Zoom or something like that.
It is.
Yeah, I know, even just now with us, but you can't really have a proper conversation with them. You can't take them for a coffee and say, right, let's go for a quick chat and, that way. But I think, for me, it's a lot of businesses that I've worked with. It's just like, it's very straight down the middle, I guess. And, I find it difficult and, I'll walk that line for a little bit and then I'll say, no, you need to have a conversation, like go and see what's happening. And I think, from me, I work with people who sales is a very emotional role and they're very open most of the time. And I think in most roles that would be the same as well. But if you're not having that conversation with them, how do you build up trust? That accountability and that, respect, and that goes both ways as well.
And that's right. I probably bundle it up in that word curious. So if a team member or one of your teams coming in and hey, I think we should do this. Why do you think that? What are the options? What's your preference? Yeah. So with curiosity comes questions. And even in meetings, I've seen plenty of leaders that feel like they need to show their leadership by being dominant or decisive. And we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Not necessarily reading the room around them or whether everyone's going to go with it and almost seeking just to force it through. Whereas a leader that can say, why do you think that? Or what's your perspective on that? Or what are the holes in my argument you can see, and be willing to challenge their own thought, even though they may absolutely agree with it. Someone who's willing to go to that place to be curious and look, I think brings people with them, and you do feel that trust. And when curious, I'm not an indecisive leader, not someone who can't make a decision, is always asking questions, but someone who is genuinely interested in the people that they work with, genuinely interested in the product or the purpose of their business. And when you have someone in that mindset, you can really feel it.
Yeah, 100%. I've been in a couple of those situations, and it just sort of puts everyone at ease, I think, in the team and getting from A to B. And I think obviously there's a big difference at times. Leaders, or as leaders, we need to make calls and decisions.
Absolutely.
And like you said, you can't be indecisive. One thing that I don't know if you've seen it. I think it was on one of the American shows with Hillary Clinton. and she said about Obama, how it was when they were going in for Osama bin Laden, and
Yes.
how they were in the sort of war room, if you want to call it that. I don't think that's the actual term for it, but they're sitting there, and Obama, like what you just said, he goes around the room and he asks everyone's opinion on, like, what do you think, and really asking everyone what the situation is, and then talking about decisiveness, he goes away, sleeps on it, and comes back with a decision. And I resonate to that quite a bit, because like you said, I'm a small business owner, and I'm the only one that can really make a decision. You get outside help and outside influence to bounce ideas off, and what do you think of this? What do you think of that? But at the end of the day, the decision falls with me, and on my head be it. But I think I've seen a lot of leaders where they will just make that impulse decision there and then, and you're looking at it going, that's just not going to work. Like, what is your thought process? Go away, think about it, review what's actually happened, and then make a decision. I don't know. I'm not President Obama, and I'll never be a president.
No, I'm well short of having that responsibility myself.
It's I just thought that was a really interesting note. What he done was, I would say, outstanding leadership. For a situation like that, and then go away, sleep on it, and come back, because I think a lot of businesses, especially during COVID, made a lot of impulse decisions, and then you're just putting out fires constantly, trying
Absolutely.
to things. And if you get that decision right the first time, I think it just makes life easier, not just for you, but for the team as well, because they're the ones operationally that will be leading it.
Absolutely. And I mean, yes, COVID put us under lots of change pressure and time pressure.
Yeah.
But for many of us that have teams, we work with teams for a reason, because often we're looking for the different ideas. We're looking for a perspective that's alternative to ours, that can test what's being done. In my military career, I worked with who's now a good friend of mine, a guy by the name of Andrew Gherkins, who asked me a question when I was first at officer training school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the best questions I was asked, and I didn't know how to answer it. And he just said, boss, how can I disagree with you in public without embarrassing you?
That is a good question. How do you respond to
it? It was golden, because how can I show that I've got a different opinion to you, but not do it in a way that brings you down or embarrasses? And I didn't have an answer. But over back and forth, we talked and discussed, and it was, he came up with a phrase, and a version of this was, can we just take a moment to think on that? Was what we agreed. So that when Andrew said, can we just take a moment to think on that? That was alarm bells for me, because it was, I talk about in my workshop, someone having your six or having your back, someone who can see what you can't see. Sorry, I'm not going to go into full Top Gun reference mode there. But someone who's got your six, who's got your back. And I could tell Andrew was seeking to have my back, seeking to look after me. And I could get quite excited at that point. He told me that if there were three options, I could easily go, there's option A, there's option B, I love B, and there's option C. Which one should we go with? And I could fully lead a discussion instead of really hearing people's perspective. And having someone working for me who so clearly had my back, but also wanted to do things respectfully and openly. Great learning. Almost learned then I don't have to speak first to lead. In fact, often you can speak last and be the decisive word once you've heard everybody else.
Yeah. It's because it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think when you go into some organizations, not every time, but sometimes you go into organizations where you're going into a role that you probably could do the role above you. And I think it's a really, like you said, and that comes into stakeholder management and how you come across and how you present ideas. But that can be a very sort of delicate path to say, right, I think we should maybe look at this. And what do you think? What do you think the outcome is without sort of upstaging your superior? Which, you know, and you know, personally, I've crossed that line a couple of times, and you don't mean to do it. You don't mean to do it in the moment. And like you said, it comes down like they just sort of feel, oh, he's embarrassed me in front of everyone else, and that's, you know, not the case. And it can be that delicate line of like, do you say it? And I think that's where, you know, what we said at the start of, if you're a leader like that who can't be open with his team, it's going to be really difficult to get the best results. You're just going to sit on that path where you're doing okay and it will stay okay. You know, you're never going to increase anything. You're just going to level out, and it's going to be like that for the foreseeable. So it's I might use that alarm bell thing. You know, can we take a minute on that? I'll take that away. I think maybe get the team to use it for me. But moving,
it got me out of a lot of problems.
I gather it probably shouldn't bring any of them up just now. We'll leave that till after.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, like I brought up, you know, Hillary Clinton when she done that interview, but you know, I think everyone is now consumed on social media. Everyone's, you know, if you're not on Instagram or TikTok, I have to admit, I love, you know, just scrolling through TikTok at the moment. It's not a good use of my time, but it's quite addictive. And one of the ones that continually, I would say, keep popping up, or two, would be Gary Vee and Simon Sinek.
Yes.
They're posting that much content. I think they're very relatable. You know, I think Gary Vee I would probably more align to him because he just says it how it is, and there's no airs or graces. And I think Simon Sinek is a little bit different. You know, he really does articulate himself really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think he thinks through things, not saying that Gary doesn't, but I think he probably appeals to maybe a different type of audience as well. Yeah. Is there anyone, you know, like I've said, I've went down the TikTok rabbit hole. I don't know, is there anyone that you've sort of aligned to, or maybe been, not to define your leadership style, but influence you? Obviously, you know, these are two massive people. It doesn't need to be on that scale, but if anyone's sort of really influenced maybe your style of leadership over the past number of years.
Yeah. I think of one of the early leaders I work for, but I won't mention him because he'll be much harder to Google or listen to. But if I think in the vein that you mentioned, I'm quite a big fan of Simon Sinek myself. I think his book, Leaders Eat Last, really stood out for me in the way he described from a practical sense. So I wonder whether my military background and I guess the way I think has sort of pushed me to those kind of influences that talk about practical leadership. So rather than just the knowledge, but how can I apply that? How can I use this? Where can I put this into practice? So Simon Sinek would definitely be one. Patrick Lencioni, who was the writer of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which was quite a big book here, you know, around that 2009 kind of time. Right. Really broke down for me the simple ways of leader and teams, and that to build a team, you have to have trust. And when you've got trust, you can deal with conflict and have robust conversations. And with that comes commitment. That really resonated with me. I have a huge leadership crush on Brené Brown, who wrote Daring Greatly. I shouldn't, the Texan accent should really grate on me, but there's something about the way that woman can talk powerfully and deal with things such as vulnerability and shame, which is, I think, as leaders, vulnerability can be a struggle. You know, we've got to be above our emotions. Yeah. Whereas I think the leader that can talk and share what they love and what they don't like is incredibly powerful. It makes life so much simpler for their team when you know what a boss likes and what they don't. And then lastly would be an English guy who wrote a book in the 70s, a guy by the name of John Adair, who wrote a book called Effective Leadership. And it was one of the first books that was shown to me in the Air Force. And his basic premise was leaders are having to juggle multiple balls at once. having to juggle their task, they're having to juggle their team, and they're having to juggle the individuals that are there as well. And as a leader and a manager, having to juggle those three things, and at different times the balls are different weights. And again, when I was managing a team and drowning, not waving, as I said to start with, that made a lot of sense to me. So they're probably the core influences for me that people could Google, find, read about, listen to podcasts, etc. So
I can't remember his name. I think it's Mike Steinberg. I read his book a couple of years ago, and I think the biggest thing I took from that is there is a massive difference between just managing people and leading, and it sounds so basic, but not a lot of people can transition at times from just managing people and like you say, just getting along with the tasks, and how do you lead a team to go to that next level. And I thought that was it was an interesting read, and I'm not a big reader by any stretch of the imagination. If it's not got cartoon colouring books in it, is it a 50-50? We never know. But I think that's one of the things I've seen, especially, I don't know if you've seen, I worked for an energy company for a while, and the energy market over here has crashed. So that could be another podcast for another day. But the biggest thing I've seen when I was there, and I found it very difficult at times, was, you come in as or people were coming in as team leaders, and they weren't. They were managers who followed the process and could only follow the process. And if I was looking from the outside looking in, and everyone kept coming and asking, what are you doing with the team? How are you getting them to this point where this team is only doing X? And the feedback that I would give is you need to speak to your team. You need to have engaging conversations with them, because it was COVID. We couldn't get into the office. I was having 3 meetings minimum a day, just speaking to them. And sometimes, you have to go into this is what we're on, and this is maybe any updates. Other times, it's just a chat to say, how are you? Have a bit of banter. And, like what you said, just take the piss a little bit out of each other to build that sort of camaraderie and get everyone on the same page. So I feel, from my experience, that sometimes people struggle, and I would say deeply struggle, moving from that manager to leader. And obviously, we've got you on that as well, which will come on again in a little bit. But I think if anyone can take anything, is, research, I think, has been key for my development. Like you say, I think you do need to be constantly, you need to be learning. You need to, if that's reading or listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video or something like that, just to figure out, right, what else can I do here to get better success from the team? And that's literally what I'd done for 6 or 7 months before that went kaput. But it was a journey, and do you know what I mean? It's never going to, you're never going to hit it on the first time. You have to blend different people's ideas into it to get a good result.
Well, there's something I was hearing that you were saying there, that the underlying kind of theme I was picking up was you've actually got to care for your people. And it's got to be genuine. Like, if you don't care for your people and you're just interested in the product or the process, you could be thought of as a manager. And I know leaders often, are thought of as above, but a true leader is someone who sees the people there as almost like they're my family. These are the people that I look after. This is my flock. I want to know about them. I want to know what makes them tick. I want them to work better. And when I say family, that on the surface, that might make it sound that a difficult conversation or trying to correct someone or get them back on the path would be harder. But you can start with that. I'm really saying this to bring you up, not to pull you down. I'm saying this because I care and I want you to get better. And I think when people feel that you really care about them, you can make a mistake and they'll also pick you back up. You'll be judged far less. It's
a trait that people really undervalue. It's just that, and you know, I don't want to be sprouting Gary Vee or reincarnate myself into him, but people, you know, honestly, you know, in my experience, if you want the best out of someone, you do have to, you know, that will say, just care, give a bit to them that, right, I do care. Like, you know, what do you need out of me to get the best out of you? And
yeah,
do you
what
know
a great question.
When it comes to one-to-ones and coaching sessions, life is so much easier because they know that you're not doing it just because it's his job. He has to do it. He has to sit down, or she, you know, it's right. He wants to actually go over this, and this is going to be a good conversation where, you know, there might be the challenging conversations that you need to come up, but you can just ask them straight out. You don't have to beat about the bush and, you know, ask them in a certain way. You can just ask them saying, like, what's happening here? And likewise, when they buy into, you know, coaching and, you know, I would do this, and this is my experience, and try that. Let me know. Let's speak in a week, and let's catch up and see if that's worked, and we can go from there. I think that's the only way you can build success. You know, you need a good foundation. You need good people around you for this. But yeah, I had people that never even were in sales and became top salespeople purely because, you know, you empower them to, you can do this. I feel you. I trust you. You can go on and you're going to make this a success. I think, you know, what happened with the other teams was, you know, well, they should be doing it. And like what we said earlier, you know, just sort of deflecting any responsibility on, well, I've told them to do this and they're just not doing it. That just doesn't fly. You know, it's something that I'm really passionate about, because I think that's the only way I can lead a team is through sort of emotion and understanding them. And I think that's how you get the best out of people, personally. And my
absolutely. And I was thinking that sometimes it can be the things that we do, but also it might be the things that we don't do.
Yeah.
And I've worked for a couple of terrible leaders, but I was blessed to work with some great leaders early on in my career. And one of those leaders said, I will never move our one-on-ones. The one-on-one is our time. It's sacrosanct. I don't book over it. Yeah. And I've seen in plenty of other organizations where a one-on-one conversation, it gets moved, it gets pushed, it gets prioritized, the customer's more important. And you watch the team, they'll adjust, they'll move, but it just slowly erodes a little bit of that trust. I'm not as important. I'm not front of mind.
Yeah, and do you know what? I've seen that like 100%, where it's just like, all right, it's not happening, and because they're sort of really looking forward to that conversation, and it's like, they're like really hurt by it because, like you said, that
you're showing you don't care.
Yeah, and and I'll put my hand up. I've definitely had to move a couple of ones previously, and
as have I.
It's harder to go into that conversation, even if it's half an hour later. It's really difficult to go in that conversation at times with maybe what you went off the back of the previous week. And I think that's interesting, because I've seen a couple of posts lately on LinkedIn and things like this where I've seen that like numerous times where people are like, you need to prioritize these meetings with your people, especially now where, you know, the job market's insane. You know, and people don't have that longevity at companies anymore. So it doesn't take a lot for people to just go, I'm just not valued. And that's what it comes down to, these meetings, is how much am I valued? And that's where like investment and, you know, and you discuss professional development, you know, and I won't name the organization, but I spoke to an organization a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, developing their people, and you get a really good conversation. I thought, this is going really well, like they really value their people. And then it comes down to that dollar sign or pound sign for the UK. And it was £150 for the year for their development. And I'm sitting there going, how are you going to get to the next level? Because to me, I look at that as that's how much you value your people, is £150 for the year for their own development. You know, and I know there's loads of courses, and you know, $7 course and you'll become rich next week and all this. You know what I mean? There's all this type of stuff out there, and, you know, meetings, valuing your people, investing in your people. I think, say if you invest, and I've had it myself in a previous role where they put me through a course, and I was like, Jesus, yes, I am valued here. Like I am the man. You know, like let's make this happen. And it not makes you feel special, but you just feel a bit more right. They actually want to put some time in me, and they can see something here.
Absolutely. And this isn't my quote, but it stayed with me. I can't remember who said this, but that question of why would I invest money and time and effort into someone if they're only going to leave? Yeah. When it comes to leadership development, and the response is, well, can you imagine if you didn't and they stayed?
Yeah.
And that has stuck with me for a while. Yeah, the person who hasn't been developed and then stays, and what's the long-term impact on you and the team and the business and its viability if you've got people that are unwilling to move or haven't been developed in their skill set or their behaviors or the way they lead. You can end up in a pretty ugly place.
Yeah, and I've been doing some recruiting recently for one of the businesses I'm working with at the moment, and sort of restructuring how they hire and, you know, what type of people and what's the screening process. And I got dragged into a meeting last week, and I seen the financials for the year, how much it costs to bring people in. And I was looking at this going, so there's X amount of people leaving each month, and this is how much it costs to bring someone new into business, and it's absolutely unreal. Like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And these people aren't getting paid, you know, 200 grand a year. You know, it's I just sit there and I go, right, well, you've got 20 really good people there. Go and make sure they stay. Do something, you know, to make them want to be here for the future. And
absolutely.
I think a lot of businesses, they have a short, medium plan. They never have a long-term plan. They never have, and I'm being very general there, but a lot of businesses don't really have, right, this person in 5 years is going to be in this role because this person will most likely leave because they'll get a bigger role at somewhere else, and they never have that sort of plan of sort of succession planning, really. And pardon me, I think that's something that, you know, it's frustrating when you're having these conversations with businesses, but I think some of them are slowly turning and getting onto that idea of, right, this is where we need to be. And the ROI and all this type of stuff that the CFO love to talk about will be there 100%.
And I think that's where a sales mentality and leading teams or recruiting for teams, there's a real alignment there in that, I don't know what the exact figures are, but when it comes to getting a new sale, it's 3-4 times harder to get a new sale to a new client, a new customer, than it is to keep happy an existing one.
Yeah.
Or to sell to an existing one that they love and they go with your product.
Yeah.
I think it's the same with your team. It's 3 or 4 times more expensive to get somebody new in. Whereas if you've taken the time and the effort and the money to develop and build, you're going to end up with a better people product that you're putting out to the world as well. But just seeking to get that new client more in the funnel. There's certain sales model that works for, certain businesses it works for, but not the ones that have retained and kept good people over a long period of time.
It's really difficult getting new business in because, like you said, it's, if you're on that sales cycle, which I am, where you need to do X amount of calls to get X amount of what you desire. Where you've got, let's just say, 50 really happy customers, so much easier going into the ones and saying, have you seen this? Let's have a conversation. Let's go for a coffee. It's so much easier than when someone doesn't know you, because it's, again, trust and all these type of things. And we won't delve into a sales podcast because I'll talk for weeks on that, Michael. But I think a lot of these things sort of come into loads of other different careers. And, I think, on the back of that, thank you again. You're running a manager to leadership workshop for Australia. That'll be, and I guess, anywhere and everywhere in Australia. You don't have to just be in Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Queensland. You can be all over the shop. So
absolutely,
just need to make sure WA's obviously got a few hours. That would be it would be an early start, but at least they get some time back in the afternoon, I guess. That's a positive in it, isn't it? So
yeah.
You're hosting that for us on the 23rd and 24th of March, which
yes,
seems a million miles away, but when I look at my planning and my whiteboard, it's not. I can assure you it's not.
It can come up fast.
Yeah, so it's under, I think it's 111 days, I think. Not that I'm counting, but that's on the 23rd and 24th of March next year.
Yes.
Like I said, it's going to be virtual, which I think, over here, it's not, I'll be honest, it's not looking too good for Christmas. It looks like another one in lockdown. So I think, when we discussed it, I think that was one of the pros of, if you are working from home, you can still develop and you can still have
absolutely
that opportunity to develop your career. And, it's everyone's used to these Zoom calls or team calls. And I think, what we've set up and what we're looking to do, I think it'll be a really successful couple of days. And I think, this is only a snippet of what you're about, Michael, but I think it'll be a really interesting 2 days for everyone as well. And, like you've already said, asking what other people think. And I think that will be really helpful because we'll have delegates from different avenues and maybe different stages in their career and different sectors who maybe approach certain situations in different ways. And I think that'll be a good networking and discussion opportunity for everyone. But a couple of things that we've looked at and we've discussed that I think we both agreed on were key to that next level, where, emotional intelligence, we've discussed that, I think, in depth today. Obviously, change is such a big thing, and how to obviously go through that strategically is going to be on the agenda, and stakeholder engagement. I think we've went into that, and resilience in times of change. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know if friend COVID is unfortunately going to come back, but it's having that resilience, and obviously that's in different things, like you said, back to your RAF days when they cut the budgets, things like that.
Absolutely.
So that's just a couple of things that obviously we'll be discussing over the 2 days. But if someone, Michael, has never obviously came along to any workshop, it doesn't have to be virtual, but what do you think, if they've never attended, what would you be looking for them to walk away with? Because everyone's got different learning styles and everyone's going to take something, I would say, different from it. Not everyone is the same, because we're not all the same either in how we approach certain situations. But if you could sort of generalize it, what would you expect them to come away from that 2 days with?
I think what's going to be a little bit different with these 2 days is, and I've delivered plenty as well as attended plenty of these leadership type 1 or 2 day sessions, is you'll often get stuff at a very high level that's very difficult to put into practice or to actually enact and work with. And I think what you and I have had the opportunity to be able to do with this, whether it's because what's worked for us or our backgrounds, to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff and go, here's what we've seen that works, and here's the stuff that you can practically apply. So whether it's around, people say, hey, dealing with change, well, here's some ways or some mindsets to focus in with that. If it's around, as you said, emotional intelligence, well, we're not just going to talk what it is and give you a definition, but how can you actually demonstrate and use this with your teams? So I think the wonderful thing about when you get to own your own business and do this, you don't have a huge amount of time to waste on something that isn't going to be useful, isn't going to be practical, and isn't going to give you a return. So we've been able to just sort of get rid of some of those things. Would be lovely if all we were focusing on was knowledge, but we were looking for leaders to put things into practice and to actually make something they can use. And so I think in a short summary, a little bit of knowledge, a good chunk of seeing others are dealing with the same kind of things as yourself, and a great deal of practical tips that you can apply and use pretty much straight away that have been tried and tested by a number of people. So yeah,
that's exactly when we first had that discussion. I think that's what we said was some of the things they might not be able to put in day one after the workshop.
Absolutely.
I think majority of it, if you can implement even 10%, over a month and then build it up slowly, hopefully, they see good results happening and they can see themselves changing as a leader as well. And I think that's the biggest thing is coming along and actually implementing it into their career, because, we can all get chucked on a training course and sit there and put yourself on mute for a couple of days and, it was fine. But if you're not actually being able to implement it, it's a waste of time for everyone. And like you said, we're not here to waste time. So
absolutely, because it is so precious, as you've said, and for you and I that absolutely respect people's learning and development budgets and know that at these times that whether it's time away or money there, you want to give people the best value for that. And I think we've come at this with that in mind first. So.
Yeah, because it needs to be a value to the business as well. And I think what we've put together, I think will be a value to anyone that attends. I love speaking to you, Michael. Absolutely love it. I'm looking forward to that cheeky cab sav when I do get to Melbourne next. But it's been an absolute pleasure. We've went over, which I think we both probably knew was going to happen.
Two people that can talk.
If we were looking at this, we knew it was definitely going to happen. But really, really enjoyed speaking with you on this, Michael. I know it's just a snapshot. Again, we could talk for days, but people's batteries may die if we continue. So we don't want to do that. But really, really enjoyed it. Thanks for coming along. And we'll pick up our next conversation with another special guest next week. And hope someone got just a little bit of information from this that can really help them in their next challenge or discussion that comes up with their career.
I hope so too. And thank you, Jack. I really enjoyed it. Appreciated the opportunity.
Perfect. Thanks again, Michael. Have a good day.
Have a great day too. Cheers.